Lemuel Gulliver, a surgeon by trade and an adventurer at heart, found himself shipwrecked and washed ashore on an unfamiliar island. Exhausted and disoriented, he collapsed on the warm sand, falling into a deep slumber.
He awoke to an odd sensation, a tingling feeling across his body. He tried to move, to rise, but found himself inexplicably pinned down. Opening his eyes, he beheld a sight that defied belief. Hundreds of tiny men, no bigger than his thumb, swarmed over him.
Fear gripped Gulliver's heart. What manner of creatures were these? They scurried and chattered, their voices high-pitched and unintelligible.
One figure, taller than the rest and adorned with a feathered hat, approached, gesturing boldly. Despite his fear, I felt a pang of amusement. The little man's stern demeanor seemed comical given his diminutive size. He attempted to speak, his voice booming like thunder to their tiny ears.
The little men scattered in terror, only to cautiously return, their curiosity overcoming their fear. Gulliver, realizing his size was their only source of terror, lay still, allowing them to bind him with thin threads. He observed them closely, marveling at their industry and organization. These were no mere savages, they were a miniature civilization, complete with their own language, customs, and even weapons. The Lilliputians, as these tiny people called themselves, transported Gulliver, their giant captive, to their capital city. The journey was a spectacle, with hundreds of tiny hands pushing and pulling at the ropes that bound him. The city itself was a marvel of miniature architecture.
I soon learned that Lilliput, despite its diminutive size, was a nation consumed by politics, just like the Europe I knew. Two factions, distinguished by the height of their heels, vied for power, the high heels and the low heels.
Their debates, though seemingly trivial to Gulliver, were waged with a seriousness that bordered on the absurd.
Gulliver witnessed their military parades, complete with miniature cannons and soldiers marching in perfect formation. He observed their elaborate court rituals and listened to their lengthy pronouncements, all delivered with an air of utmost importance.
I couldn't help but chuckle. Their tiny world, a microcosm of human folly, magnified the absurdity of human ambition and conflict. Yet, beneath this veneer of grandiosity, I discovered a people of remarkable ingenuity and resourcefulness.
Initially feared as a monstrous giant, Gulliver, through patience and gestures, managed to gain the Lilliputians' trust.
I learned their language, adapted to their customs, and even participated in their courtly rituals, albeit carefully, given my size.
He became a source of amusement for me, the Lilliputian emperor, who delighted in making Gulliver perform feats of strength, like lifting heavy objects or marching in time with the royal band.
Gulliver, despite his initial amusement, began to see the world through Lilliputian eyes. He realized that their concerns, though seemingly insignificant, were as real and important to them as matters of war and peace were to his own people.
I understood that size was relative, and that what seemed trivial to me could be a matter of life and death to those who perceived the world from a different perspective. I found myself caught in their political intrigues, used as a pawn in their power struggles.
The emperor, despite showering Gulliver with honors and titles, saw him as a tool, a weapon to be wielded against his enemies. Gulliver, once a man of action and adventure, was reduced to a passive giant, a plaything in the hands of those who controlled his food and freedom. This realization was a humbling experience for Gulliver. Gulliver's adventures in Lilliput ended as abruptly as they began. Accused of treason on flimsy charges, he fled the island, eventually finding his way back to the familiar world of his own kind. But his journey was far from over.
Fate, it seemed, had other plans for me, leading me to an even stranger, more unsettling land, Brobdingnag. If Lilliput was a world in miniature, Brobdingnag was its polar opposite.
Here everything was gigantic, from the towering trees that scraped the sky to the inhabitants themselves, who towered over Gulliver like living mountains.
He found himself once again a Lilliputian, dwarfed by creatures of immense size and strength.
His arrival in Brobdingnag was no less dramatic than his landing in Lilliput. Spotted by a farmer as a curious creature crawling through the fields, he was scooped up and carried in the farmer's hand.
Imagine my terror, staring up at a face that resembled a weathered cliff, each tooth the size of my thumb.
Yet, just as he'd learned to navigate the miniature world of Lilliput, Gulliver adapted to life among the giants of Brobdingnag. He quickly learned that size, for all its initial impact, did not dictate the measure of a being. Just as he had found wisdom and folly in equal measure among the Lilliputians, he encountered a similar spectrum of character among the Brobdingnagians. The Brobdingnagians, despite their intimidating size, proved to be a gentle and philosophical race. In Brobdingnag, size was not a source of power or conflict, but a simple fact of life. They valued knowledge and wisdom above all else, their society structured around learning and contemplation rather than conquest or accumulation.
Gulliver, in turn, found himself captivated by their culture, a stark contrast to the petty squabbles and political machinations of Lilliput.
Their king, a wise and learned man, took a keen interest in Gulliver and his tales of the world beyond their shores.
Gulliver spent his days in the Brobdingnagian court, sharing stories of his travels and his homeland.
The king, though amused by Gulliver's accounts of European politics and warfare, was also dismayed by what he perceived as the pettiness and violence of humankind.
He saw in Gulliver's tales a reflection of humanity's flawed nature, our capacity for both great good and terrible destruction.
Life in Brobdingnag, for all its serenity, was not without its perils for one so small as Gulliver.
He was forced to navigate a world where even the smallest creatures posed a threat. A playful cat became a fearsome predator, a dropped crumb a potential landslide.
He had to be constantly vigilant, his survival depending on the kindness and awareness of the giants around him. He traveled within the palace walls, a miniature explorer in a land of colossal wonders.
A single stalk of wheat towered over him like a mighty oak. A drop of dew clinging to a leaf became a refreshing pool.
Yet amidst these adventures, Gulliver never forgot his own world, his thoughts often drifting back to his wife and home.
He yearned for the familiar, for a world where he didn't have to strain his neck to hold a conversation or worry about being stepped on like an insect.
Fate, however, had other plans. Just as he had been shipwrecked on the shores of Lilliput, he found himself once again at the mercy of the sea. A giant eagle, mistaking his traveling box for a tasty morsel, carried him off and dropped him into the vast ocean.
He was rescued miraculously by a passing ship, but this time his destination was home.
Returning to England after his years spent in Lilliput and Brobdingnag, Gulliver was a changed man.
He could no longer look at the world through the same eyes.
He struggled to readjust to life in England, a world that now seemed both familiar and strange. He had seen the extremes of human nature, magnified and minimized by the lens of size.
He was haunted by the memory of the tiny Lilliputians with their petty conflicts, and the gentle giants of Brobdingnag with their wisdom and serenity.
He found himself questioning the values of his own society, the things that people took for granted, the things they fought for, the things they held dear.
He realized that true happiness lay not in power or possessions, but in knowledge, understanding, and compassion. He had left England a man of his time, bound by the conventions and prejudices of his age.
He had traveled to the farthest reaches of the earth, only to discover that the most important journey was the one within.
He returned a citizen of the world, his perspective broadened, his empathy deepened, his understanding of humanity forever altered.
Gulliver, though back in England, could never truly return to the life he once knew.
He carried within him the indelible mark of his travels, the memories of the tiny and the gigantic, the lessons learned from cultures vastly different from his own.
His adventures had not made him bitter or cynical, but had instead instilled in him a profound sense of wonder and a deep-seated compassion for all beings, regardless of their size or stature.
He found solace in writing about his experiences, hoping to share with the world the wisdom he had gleaned from his extraordinary journeys.
He wrote not to entertain, but to enlighten, to challenge the reader's perceptions, to make them question their own assumptions about the world and their place in it.
He wanted to share the transformative power of perspective, the humbling realization that there is always more to learn, more to understand.
His tales, though fantastical, carried a powerful message, a message that resonated with readers across generations. They spoke of the universality of human experience, the common threads that bind us together despite our differences.
Gulliver, the adventurer, the surgeon, the reluctant pawn in the games of giants and kings, became Gulliver the storyteller, the chronicler of the human condition.
His adventures, born of shipwreck and circumstance, became a voyage of self-discovery, a testament to the enduring power of curiosity, empathy, and the human spirit's endless capacity for wonder.